The first B patch of set 16 is live, and this one was planned, so they knew they were going to do this because they wanted to make the Paris Open as good as possible. And there have been some shifts in the meta, so we're starting off with meta TFT because I want to show exactly what's changed. First of all, we're looking at Emerald Plus, which on 16.1 was higher elo than it is in 16.1b, so there is going to be some data discrepancies due to that, but not nearly as large as you're about to see. So first of all, if we look at Annie, 0.73 and 0.48 pick rate, these are basically the same comp, slightly different variations. If we look at 16.1, 1.05 and 0.61. So much higher pick rate in the last patch than this patch. Now, part of this is because Emerald in last patch was higher elo, and higher elo tends to play Fast 9 more because it was the meta thing to do. But even from watching a lot of high elo games, the Fast 9 prevalence has definitely gone down quite a bit. And the reason for this is they decided to nerf 6 Yordles, the number of rerolls that you get from 2 down to 1 every single round. They did buff the Yordles in compensation, but I tend to think that the reroll nerf was bigger because they also nerfed some of the 5 cost. And by nerfing some of the 5 cost, you're actually stable later. You need more gold invested in your board in order for a Fast 9 board to be able to stabilize. So you have less gold and you need more gold to stabilize, which basically means that Fast 9 is more conditional than it was before. So we're seeing a number of different Fast 8 boards become a little bit more popular. For example, Yonara, if we look at this, 4.3, 4.3, compared to last patch, it was around 4.6 and a 4.4. If we were to look at Kaisa, you can see that the pick rate was 0.24 and 4.25 average placement. You look at this patch, 3.9 average placement. Pick rate is a little bit higher. If we go even higher elo, that pick rate will be even higher for Kaisa because she's doing relatively well right now. If you look at Lissandra, for example, Lissandra is also doing better on this patch. So if you look at Freljord, this is a 4.3. If you go to last patch on Emerald Plus, it was a 4.6 because if you were playing Fast 8, you were basically playing for top 4 and nothing better. Now you have at least a better chance of maybe going second. You're still probably not going to win most games on Fast 8 boards because they don't cap as high as the Fast 9 boards still. So if we go over to TFT Flow, for example, you're still going to see Arcanist in S tier, but the main difference is that you can't play for Arcanist every single game that you get a Yordle opener, for example, like you could before. So the major shift in the meta is that Fast 8 is more prevalent. So you're going to find Diana Flex, which was already doing quite well last patch with the new attack speed based build. That one is still doing relatively well. You're going to find Kaisa is doing well. You're going to find Yonara is doing okay. Slayers are doing better than they were before. You're going to find Freljord is doing better than it was before. So these Fast 8 lines and some reroll lines like Ashe and Tryndamere, which we'll talk about later, are also doing better because they have a place in the meta now that they didn't before when Fast 9 was easier. All right, first up, we have Bilgewater Flex. You'll notice that this is still an S tier. The main difference is that they nerfed Lucky Doubloon from giving you 3 Silver Serpents on takedown down to 1. So most Challenger players are no longer taking the Lucky Doubloon. They're skipping it altogether. They're saving their Silver Serpents and focusing exclusively on the 7 Bilgewater items, and then dropping down to 3 Bilgewater later on in the game, either playing around Freljord or the 5 cost. So it's the same comp. You're just not playing for Lucky Doubloon anymore like you were before because it's basically a poor item that puts you behind tempo on hitting the 7 Bilgewater items. All right, next up we have Arcanists. So when I last covered Arcanist, I was showing the 6 Arcanist board. I wasn't showing the Seraphine Azir board as the main variation. I now think this is the main variation that you should play towards in most of your games. But there was another variation that gained in popularity, which was this natural transition from Fast 9 Yordles, which was not a thing when I first recorded that video for the original patch, but then became incredibly popular where you would rush to 6 Yordles, get your 2 free rerolls every single round, and then go 8 Yordles on 4-1, sack all of stage 4, and then go level 9 on 5-1, go all in and play for this board because this was the easiest transition with Koboko and Kennen staying on your board. But they nerfed Yordle from 2 free rerolls around down to 1 free reroll around. And as a result of that, you're going to find that this board, as well as the other board, is a little bit more difficult to get to because they also decided to nerf Sylas, they nerfed Lucian and Senna, and the end result is that this board is weaker than it was before, needs more gold in order to stabilize. They didn't decide to nerf Annie, thankfully. I know a lot of people are upset about that, but they needed to keep Annie where she was for this board to continue to be strong, which it should be strong, but it is now a little bit more balanced around actually hitting the board and not stabilizing on completely a 1-star board like it was before. So you are going to need to hit the upgrades, which usually means you're going to need at least 1, maybe 2 econ augments to reliably hit this, in addition to something like a Yordle opener like you had before. All right, next up we have Diana Flex. So this comp did exist when I made the original patch guide for 16.1, but this build was not popular at the time, which is Bloodthirster Titan's Rageblade, and it makes roughly a half a placement swing. The comp was starting to become oppressive during the A patch. When they B patched, they nerfed Diana's attack speed, and the comp is still good. This is still her best in slot build, especially because Fast 9 is less consistent now. That was one of the few ways that Diana could lose, although she did have a decent matchup into Annie until they were able to hit Silas that could actually one-shot the Diana. But yeah, we're currently in a spot now where Diana is still quite good. You're still going to want to angle towards this line if you get something like a Lich Bane, if you get one of these artifacts that is good on Diana, or most importantly, if you're able to guarantee this Leona too, because that is the biggest barrier for being able to play this comp. Typically, the way that it was played during the A patch is you would play it from a Yordle opener, and then you would use those free rerolls on level 7 to try to hit Leona. Now, because you're only getting one free reroll a turn, it's a little bit more difficult to do that. It's probably still one of the main ways to get to that Leona 2. Just understand that the biggest gateway to this comp is being able to actually get this 2-star Leona, which typically means you are going to have to burn some rolls on 7. So having an econ augment that allows you to do that, maybe having a Leona from Orb so you're already one ahead, maybe having something like Heroic Grab Bag in particular is quite good, team building is quite good. So just be aware that the biggest gate for this comp, in addition to having best in slot on Diana, is hitting Leona 2. All right, next up we have Void. So they buffed both versions of Kai'Sa. They buffed the AD and AP versions of her. They buffed the AD version by a lot more than the AP version, but I still think the AP version has the edge based on what I've seen as well as in the stats. But the gap is smaller than it was before. You can play around AD Kai'Sa. What I don't think has been figured out is the best way to play around Void. If you look at last patch, most people were taking a bunch of prismatic econ augments. They were playing this in Scuttle Puddle, for example, and they were trying to push to level 10 so that they can unlock Baron Nashor and play for their top 2. Now, because Kai'Sa is stronger, the level 8 board is actually quite stable. So if we look at 6 Void, for example, here, where you're looking to play around Rift Herald, Bel'Veth, and Kai'Sa, or Rift Herald, Kai'Sa, and Malzahar, they actually did decide to buff Malzahar as well, for the record. This board is a lot more stable than you think it is. Now, I know this is the level 9 version. You're always going to want to play the Bruiser, and then you could play either Swain or Azir and drop the other. The main thing to understand here is that this 6 Void board, when you hit Rift Herald 2 and Kai'Sa 2, is stable until roughly late stage 5. So one option that you can go for instead of playing for all these econ augments and trying to go level 10 is you could actually pick some item augments, or you could pick some combat augments so that you're able to stabilize even later and just play for your top 3, top 2 on level 8, level 9, instead of going for Baron Nashor as your cap, because Kai'Sa is noticeably stronger than she was before. So I don't think that's been figured out yet. Try out both ways of playing the line. I do think you're going to find that the level 8, level 9 boards are more consistent than trying to push for level 10 every single game by going double econ, for example. The other way that you can look to play around Kai'Sa is a lot less popular, but I do think that it's viable, which is Kai'Sa Flex. This is where you don't go vertical into Void, and you can either play 2 Void or 4 Void. I think 2 Void is a lot better than playing around 4 Void, and in order to play 2 Void, you must have an offensive Void module on 2. Ideally, it's Adrenaline modules, but if it's Spiky, if it's, I forget, Leeching, there's a couple of other offensive ones that you can play around. If it's one of those, then fine, but if you have a tank Void on 2, you're not going to be able to play this board because you need to have a good Void module for Kai'Sa for this to work. There are some Rift Herald boards that are mentioned here, but honestly, I have not seen these since PBE. I might even remove them from the website because I'm not even sure that they're viable anymore. But for sure, these boards should be viable because you're playing around pretty standard packages here. The big thing to understand with Kai'Sa Flex is you're always looking to play around this Kai'Sa Kog'Maw Swain package, and then you're filling out with as many high quality units as possible. All right, next up we have Demacia. So I mentioned in my last video that there was an uptick in the number of people that were looking to play around Vayne into Demacia instead of the typical Sona invokers into Lux AP route. And that has continued into this patch. It wasn't that popular last patch unless you had something like Demacia Forever or Vayne from Orb, for example, and it still didn't cap that high. But now because Fast 8 is more popular and more stable in the meta, we're finding that this Vayne line, especially if you're able to get the Vayne at the very beginning of the game and you have a good item slam for her, she's able to win streak stage 2 and stage 3 relatively easily as long as you have a decent front line for her. And now with the Kai'Sa buff as well, you can actually play Kai'Sa duo carry on level 8 as an option instead of Lux duo carry like you were doing before. So you have both of those as options, which makes this line a lot more consistent. Even though they did nerf the best augment for this comp, which is Demacia Forever, I still have seen this augment do relatively well, so I still think it's quite strong. All they did was nerf the permanent health from 7 down to 4, which is a pretty big nerf, but they're still getting the permanent AD and AP every 3 rallies, which probably adds up quite a bit over the course of the game. So Vayne is something to keep an eye out for. You don't have to reroll for her. You can just play her as a 2-star. You can use her to go fast 9 just because of how powerful she is. You don't even have to play towards this Demacia line, but this is the most popular way that you can look to play around Vayne, and she is doing relatively well right now if you're able to get her early. All right, next up we have Ashe Tryndamere. So this was a line that I considered a meme comp during last patch. There was no spot where you should ever play it, basically. So I didn't even have it on the website because I honestly thought you were going to lose LP with it most of the time. But they decided to buff Tryndamere in the B patch, as well as the shift in the meta towards fast 8 comps. You're finding that this line is quite a bit better than it was during last patch, especially, this is the big thing I want to point out, especially if you're able to get a good artifact or radiant item for Tryndamere or Ashe. Rapid fire cannon in particular looks like it's completely broken on Tryndamere. There's not a lot of data for this specific build. There is decent data for rapid fire plus QSS, but the third item is unknown. Right now people are building Bloodthirster, but I know from historical experience that with rapid fire cannon, you're not supposed to build Omnivamp, especially when you have built-in 10% Omnivamp from Slayer anyway. So I'm pretty sure it should be something like Kraken or IE or whatever. And based on the fact that he is an auto attack based champion, I'm pretty sure that it should just be Kraken, but we'll see in the future whether this ends up being the best in slot build. But the big thing is rapid fire cannon, QSS, some third item. It should be some sort of damage item, whether that's GS or whatever. I think this build is completely broken on Tryndamere, and you should be aware of it and try it out and report back to me on the website or on this video if it looks good, because I do think it's going to be quite strong and might be one of those few artifact enabling options on this patch. All right, next up we have Trials of Twilight Zaahen. So they decided to buff this hero augment by buffing Zaahen. They also buffed Yasuo, so the comp is noticeably better. I had it at C tier on the website for last patch. It might have honestly been D tier, but it does look noticeably better now. The one thing I'm not certain about at this point is whether you should play towards Ionia or Demacia. I think that'll be figured out over the next couple of days. I believe right now in the stats, Demacia looks better, but it has a much lower play rate, and honestly, the Ionia version just makes more sense to me. So that's just going to be down to balance. The main thing that the Demacia version has going for it is Vayne is a completely broken unit. If you can play around this unit in the early mid game, then I suspect that the Demacian version will look better. But otherwise, I tend to think that this version just makes more sense because you're re-rolling for Yasuo 3, which gives you a higher cap with Yone as well. It just makes sense to me. So I'll be curious to see where this lands, and I will update the website as people figure out whether the Ionia version or the Demacia version is better. All right, I don't even know why I'm including this on the patch guide, but they did buff it. It is technically playable, especially if you're lower elo. It is a cool augment, but if you're looking to gain LP, do not click this. It is slightly better than it was before. You can play the Rumble Hero augment. The best in slot build is Rageblade, Archangel, Giant Slayer. I do believe this build is noticeably better than the other ones, so try to get this if you can. And that's it. I mean, generally do not play towards this line though. Do not click this augment. That's my personal opinion. All right, that is it for the B patch. I'm sure there will be more discoveries. My goal with these videos is to upload them as quickly as possible. And then any changes, if you want to stay up to date with the meta, you can come over to TFT Flow. You can go to any of the other number of websites that are available for seeing changes that occur. But this is a basic introduction to the way that the B patch changed the meta. And good luck with your climb. Good luck if you're going to the Paris Open. And I will see you next time.